Okay. Bring forth our writing device. It is powered off. How on earth did it do that? I don't think it ran out of power. Anyway, not important. Let's read a little bit. Eliminative materialism. Eliminative materialism. Some or all of the mental states do not actually exist. Okay, cool. Descartes famously challenged much of what we take for granted, but he insisted that for the most part we can be confident about the content of our own minds. Eliminative materialists go further than Descartes on this point, since they challenge the existence of various mental states that Descartes took for granted. Yeah, I think the Quora comment that triggered this is like, yeah, the only thing we can know about is our conscious experience. But I mean, that doesn't mean... So the denial of conscious experience is about as ridiculous as a claim can get. Just from having read the title there, the denial of conscious experience is here sort of being made to say that it's I haven't read it all, but it seems to me like the interpretation I would do, best faith interpretation of the eliminative materialism, is that the conscious states, our experience of the conscious states, are unaffected. It's just that what these states aren't what they seem to us to be. That our conscious experience isn't an accurate representation of, like, let's take an example. Love. I remember this was very fun when, like, really sort of letting yourself fall in love with someone. I remember sort of doing it, turning off the cynical part of my brain and just saying, experiencing the emotion fully. And the thing you sort of notice is, when you're in love, it feels like the love will last forever. I have no basis for believing this, but that's the experience of it. So it is entirely possible, and we have good sort of evidentiary reasons, because obviously I haven't gotten to that point yet, but I have. I mean, I broke up with the person, or she broke up with me, the person who. So it's sort of like letting yourself feel like that the experience of reality isn't necessarily reflective of reality. It's like a step removed from reality, and sure, it's the only step we have access to. We don't have direct access to reality, and that's kind of the sort of fun and interesting part about epistemology, is this sort of conflict here between... So I feel like denying conscious experience is much more reasonable than Mr. Andy here makes it out to be. Positions. Okay, let's... Immaterial soul. Hard determinists are eliminatives with regard to free will, and Hume was arguably an eliminatist about ordinary notions of the self. These sort of eliminative association... Eliminativism associated with eliminative materialism. Okay, let's read it. Let's read it like I would... We can take a deep breath. I'm going to do more reading, I think, because that's more of my style. A brief history. Eliminativist positions about aspects of human nature have been around for some time. Reductive materialists are eliminativists about an immaterial soul. Hard determinists are eliminativists with regard to free will. And Hume was arguably an eliminativist about our ordinary notion of the self. Yet the sort of eliminativism associated with eliminative materialism, the sort that denies the existence of specific types of mental states like beliefs, is a relatively new theory with very short history. Its roots can be found in the writings of a number of mid-20th century philosophers, most notably Wilfrid Sellars, Quine, of course, Feyerabend, and Richard Rorty. Quine? Jesus. I remember reading like one of Quine's most famous arguments and being like, no, this is clearly absurd. Or maybe I was I'm mixing it up here, but I'm typically very critical of. That's how I understand things, by being critical of them. First introduced by James Cornman in 1968, while describing a version of physicalism endorsed by Rorty. However, the general idea goes at least as far back as C.D. Broad's 1925 classic, The Mind and Its Place in Nature, in which Broad discusses and quickly rejects a type of pure materialism that treats mental states as attributes that apply to nothing in the world. Despite the important role these philosophers played in the development of eliminativism, it is far from clear that they all would subscribe to more modern formulations of the doctrine. So there's a lot actually to unpack just in this one, but so let's see. The sort that denies the so this is so far what I've gotten from it. Denies the existence of specific types of mental states like beliefs. So I'm not sure. So if I say that our beliefs, the mental states of beliefs, have a physical reality in the sense that they're a certain brain state, am I denying the existence of the belief, or am I affirming it? Because for me, typically, like when people talk about the existence of or the mind, I think very sort of platonically about it. That they're thinking about it as like the Platonic solids, these sort of ideal forms, and the realm space of the ideas, and sort of the idea that these things exist independently of our conception of them isn't immediately clear. It might do. Basically, is a limit of materialism sort of, in principle, it would reject mathematics and stuff. If I'm like, it seems like there's two sort of extreme positions here, and I'm not entirely clear which one it is. So next paragraph, I think we'll go on and see what we learn. In his important 1956 article, Empiricism and the Philosophy of Mind, Sellers introduced the idea that our conception of mentality may be derived not from direct access to the inner workings of our mind, but instead from a primitive theoretical framework that we inherit from our culture. While Sellers himself regarded this theoretical framework as empirically correct, his claim that our conception of the mind is theory-based, and at least in principle falsifiable, would be influential to later supporters of eliminativism. Interesting. Conception of mentality may derive not from direct access, but instead of primitive theoretical. Okay, interesting. In articles such as Mental Events in the Brain, Paul Feyerabend explicitly endorsed the idea that common sense psychology might prove to be radically false. Indeed, Feyerabend held that practically any version of materialism would severely undermine common sense psychology. Like many of his contemporaries, Feyerabend argued that common sense mental notions are essentially non-physical in character. Thus, for him, any form of physicalism would entail that there are no mental processes or states understood by common sense. Okay. Sure. Like it's common sense mental notions are essentially non-physical in character. Thus, for him, any form of physicalism would entail no mental processes or states. Yes, sure. See, this is where it sort of gets funky. Because what are we denying here, really? We're denying we're denying our conception of the thing, not the thing in and of itself. There's not that, the important insight here, or like, the reason why I'm thinking like this is because I just think this is silly core answer, which of course all core answers are, but saying that as someone who has a core answer, which I'm very proud of, it seems to me that it's not so much denying conscious experience's existence, more or less it's denying that our conscious experience refers to the thing that is existence. We experience reality, experience our mind. We experience our reality through our mind. So even though it's not necessarily an accurate representation of reality, and sort of our conceptions of non-physical things especially fail to this. Yeah. Okay. Like Feyerabend, Quine also endorsed the idea that mental notions like belief or sensation would simply be abandoned in favor of more. I mean, it's a very. I'm gonna scroll in so it looks bigger as well. Like Feyerabend, I don't know. Quine also endorsed the idea that mental notions like belief or sensation could simply be abandoned in favor of a more accurate physiological account. Yeah, right? In a brief passage in Word and Object, Quine suggests that terms denoting the physical correlates of mental states will be more useful, and, as he puts it, the bodily states exist anyway. Why add the others? Yeah, Quine, high five. However, Quine goes on to question just how radical an eliminativist form of materialism would actually be, implying no significant difference between explicating mental states as physiological states and eliminating mental state terms in favor of physical state terms. Yeah, 100%. This is exactly what I've been thinking while reading, and while I read the other one. He asks, is physicalism a repudiation? Oh, that lovely word, a repudiation. Not just repudiate, but a repudiation of... He asks, is physicalism a repudiation of mental objects after all, or a theory of them? Does it repudiate the mental state of pain or anger in favor of its physical concomitant, or does it identify the mental state with the state of the physical organism? And so a state of the physical organism, a state of the physical organism with a mental state. Quine answers this question by rejecting it, suggesting there is no interesting difference between the two cases. Some may therefore find comfort in reflecting that the distinction between eliminative and an explicative physicalism is unreal. Yeah, I think that's... Yeah, okay. Well, that's good, because now I don't care to read it anymore. But, okay, let's read the next one, because it starts with, here we see the tension. Here we see a tension that runs throughout the writings of many early eliminative materialists. The problem involves a vacillation between two different conditions. I mean, vacillation, I know I love these words, but clearly this is where we're getting too deep into the dictionary at this point. The problem involves a vacillation between two different conditions under which mental concepts and terms are dropped. The first scenario proposes that certain mental concepts will turn out to be empty, with mental states referring to nothing that actually exists. Okay. Oh, I see. Certain mental concepts will turn out to be empty. I don't think that can be entirely true. They won't be entirely empty. That doesn't make sense to me. Oh, I am low on battery here. I should charge my thing here. Ugh. Sorry. It was unfortunately quite tangled into the microphone. There we go. We will leave that to the side until we need it. Historical analogues for this way of understanding eliminativism are cases where we now say it turned out that there are no such things, such as demons and crystal spheres. I think this is also because it's not... The concept of a demon isn't an empty concept still. Even if the thing isn't as we imagined it. Like, on an extreme end, a lot of sexual dreams ended up being categorized as demonic in nature. They were very sort of sexually... Oh my god, the volume I had on. Jesus Christ, I need to turn that down. So yeah. So, like, concepts like demons and crystal spheres might not be as we imagined them, but they might sort of refer to something else. So, like, the experience of a sexual dream, of a wet dream, might be associated with sort of the concept of the succubus, a specific sort of demon in this case, or indeed, for instance, the gods of Warhammer. These sort of demons are aspects of mental states, and sort of, well, yeah, that's even a better one. That's like the radically opposite view, that the mental states we have are real things that exist in their own warp space. Or unreal. I mean, calling it real is interesting given how that's used in Warhammer. But, yeah, so these things could be referenced to mental states, or these ideas are references to other mental states, which are indeed just representations of a physical state. I don't see the I wouldn't argue. I would say it seems weird to say that they're empty, but the second scenario suggests that the conceptual framework provided by neurosciences or some other physical account can or should come to replace the common sense framework we now use. Unlike the first scenario, the second allows that mental state terms may actually designate something real. It's just that what they designate turn out to be brain states, which will be more accurately described using the terminology of the relevant sciences. One possible model for this way of thinking about eliminativism might be the discontinuance of talk about germs in favor of more precise scientific terminology of infectious agents. Like not just germs in general, but like bacteria, viruses, the distinction of them. Given these two different conceptions, earlier eliminativists would sometimes offer two different characterizations of their view. A, there are no mental states, just brain states, and B, there really are mental states, but they're just brain states, and we'll come to view them that way. I think these are honestly indistinguishable. I'm going to go with Quine and say, these alternative ways of understanding eliminative materialism produced considerable confusion about what exactly eliminative materialism entailed. Moreover, since it was difficult to see how the second version was significantly different from various forms of reductive materialism, hence Quine's skepticism about the difference between elimination and explication, it also raised doubts about the distinctiveness of eliminative materialism. Much of this was brought to the light in the discussion generated by an influential 1965 article by Richard Rorty entitled Mind-Body Identity, Privacy and Categories. Rorty's so-called disappearance theories appeared to openly endorse both conceptions of eliminative materialism, suggesting that sensations do not actually exist and that they are nothing but brain processes. Yes, I mean, that doesn't mean they don't actually exist. I mean, it's sort of the problem here is the eliminativist and the reductive materialist is sort of insisting that the reality of our experience of the thing isn't necessarily the same as the thing in and of itself. It doesn't mean that they're empty concepts. They just refer to different things than what the concepts feel like what the concepts claim to be referring to. You could even sort of stretch this maybe to mathematical concepts, and if I say a triangle, I'm referring to something that doesn't exist. There is no ideal triangle, the concept I have in my mind, but it's the thing that exists is my brain state while thinking about the triangle, and the thing that exists is other objects which are relevantly similar to this concept. Objects that have triangular aspects, for instance. But these indeed are also just interpreted in sort of, everything is interpreted in the brain, and the brain is imperfect in doing so. I really like the reference to Descartes at the beginning here, because it's correct. Or it seems to me to be the basis for this kind of thinking is just that we have to be like when Descartes was thinking about this sort of demon, the Cartesian demon, who can basically a god who can decide what your experience is, would effectively mean the existence of such a demon would effectively mean that you cannot trust your even things like mathematics, because that might just be your misapprehension of the thing in and of itself. And so and the possibility of this demon existing essentially, I think, derives this sort of this elimination of the reduction, I'd say, more of the our experience. the qualia, our feeling about what concepts are. But where was we? Sensations do not actually exist, and they are nothing but brain processes. Yeah, our sensations aren't certain, and therefore our sensations don't necessarily refer to the thing that the sensation says. Maybe like stretching it, like when I can feel in such pain that I feel like I'm going to, like, I feel like I'm losing my hand, or I'm going to die even. Let's do it sort of a simplified way. If you feel so much pain that you're afraid for your life, it doesn't necessarily mean that your life is at risk. It just means that the pain is triggering this feeling. Our experience of reality isn't necessarily what reality is. It just seems like this sort of interpretation follows from the problem of sort of the subjective and the objective, it follows from the sort of essential doubt inherent in because even if there is a mind-body duality, and these sort of thoughts do have their own existence, we're effectively in the same position, because they're not referring to even though the brain states or the thoughts might exist in a sort of transcendental way, in an immaterial way, they don't necessarily refer to, or they're not necessarily accurate. So we're effectively in the same position. It doesn't really matter whether or not the mental states exist or not. We should treat them as though they are imperfect reference to reality, which is, I would argue, just inherent in the idea of whatchamacallit, how that works. But yeah, I think actually, we'll read honestly, that's so annoying, because like every time I'm thinking like, I don't need to understand, I understand enough of what I think I need, but it's a little bit interesting. So where were we? Yes, as one might expect, the ensuing discussion focused on getting clear on what Rorty's theory actually claimed, and one helpful article by William Lycan and George Papas, entitled, appropriately enough, "What is Eliminative Materialism?" convincingly argued that you can't have it both ways. You can either claim that common sense mental notions do not pick out anything real, in which case you are a true eliminative materialist, or you can claim that mental notions can be, in some ways, reduced to neurological and perhaps computational states of the brain, in which case you're just a good old-fashioned materialist reductionist. In a follow-up article, so that's kind of what I'm not entirely sure, but let's finish. In a follow-up article, Stephen Savitt introduced the distinction between ontologically conservative, reductive, and ontologically radical, eliminative theory change, which helped to further clarify and distinguish the central claim of eliminative materialism as it is understood today. You can either claim that common sense mental notions do not pick out anything real. I don't understand. I don't understand the conception of what that actually means. Yeah, okay, fair enough. You're right. It is nonsensical. It doesn't. Or I can't at least make sense of it. What does it mean that it doesn't pick out anything real? I mean, at the very least, it's caused by something real. Let's read the final paragraph of the introduction here. In a more recent history, eliminative materialism has received attention from a broader range of writers, including many concerned not only with the metaphysics of the mind, but also the process of theory change, the status of semantic properties, the nature of psychological explanation, and recent developments in cognitive science. Much of this attention has been fostered by the husband-wife team of Paul and Patricia Churchland, whose writings have forced many philosophers and cognitive science to take eliminativism more seriously. In his 1981 article, Eliminative Materialism and the Propositional Attitudes, Paul Churchland presents several arguments in favour of dropping common sense psychology that have been shaped modern debate about the status of ordinary notions like belief. Richard Churchland's provocative 1986 book, Neurophilosophy, suggests that developments in neuroscience point to a bleak future for common sense mental states. Another influential author has been Stephen Stitch. His important 1983 book, From Folk Psychology to Cognitive Science, The Case Against Belief, argues that even conventional computational psychology, which is often assumed to vindicate common sense psychology, should reject taxonomies for cognitive states that correspond with beliefs desirous psychology. The author's views are discussed in more detail in sections 2 and 3 below. I want to know more about that, but I think it's too heavy right now. I want to read something a little bit more chill. So yesterday in the video I got these two lovely little articles came up on screen. This one and this one. And we can listen to it?
Consciousness is the biggest problem for materialism. How is it possible that a bunch of particles that are devoid...
Oh, what's happened to my head? Oh, my headphones are off.
Of consciousness get to get consciousness is the biggest problem for materialism.
I'm gonna read it myself. I don't like those. I don't like my own either. Okay. No materialist theory of consciousness is plausible. Now this isn't just about we've done all the dry philosophy reading that I'm probably going to be bothering to do today, but to be clear, this isn't necessarily about eliminativist materialism. The reductive materialism I was advocating for while reading would also be included in this. So, no materialist theory of consciousness is plausible. All such theory by Eric Holloway. All such theories either deny the very thing they are trying to explain, result in absurd scenarios, or end up requiring an immaterial intervention. Interesting. Interesting. I mean, it's a catchy way to start that, that's for sure. It really wants me to criticize it. Consciousness is the biggest problem for materialism. How is it possible that a bunch of particles that are devoid of consciousness get together and cause consciousness? I think it's a similar way to how a bunch of think of how fundamental physics is too complicated, but the idea of emergent properties and functions isn't like how is it possible that a bunch of particles who are devoid of life can get together and cause life? Well, the question isn't. The question is just an appeal to credulity, right? It's just I can't understand how it does it, and that's fair. We don't understand yet how it does it. I think the idea that we don't understand yet is not a reason to believe that it can't. But and I also, like I said, I think there are examples where we use these things happen. Life is probably the most clean of these examples. There are non-living particles, but when they interact together in a specific way, they interact to create life. And we might know how life functions now, and we might see how a bunch of non-living particles interact in a living way, but we also don't really know how that happened. So an argument that how is it possible for a bunch of particles to become living is still as much of an open question as the problem of consciousness. One proposed solution is that all particles are conscious. That's a crazy one. But in that case, why am I a human instead of a particle? Because you are? That's just a trivial reality. That statement has absolutely no bearing on anything. The vast majority of conscious beings in the universe would be particles, and so it is most likely I'd be a particle and not any sort of organic life form. Yes, but for you to be in a position to make this question, you would have to be a human. It's a misapplication of the sort of anthropic principle. All of the particles aren't thinking, why am I not a particle? They're thinking, oh, I am a particle. I wonder what these humans are thinking, right? So, I mean, I reject the concept that all particles are conscious, but if they are, that doesn't mean that you should expect to be a particle. I mean, unless you're sort of thinking of it from the sense of maybe you die and you're about to be reincarnated. In that case, and like you're consciously thinking about, oh, I wonder what kind of body I'm going to need to. In that case, the fact that particles are conscious might be interesting and relevant. That might increase the likelihood of you being a particle. But at the moment, you are not a particle. And so the asking question, why am I not a particle, is nonsensical. The only question, you are already not a particle for you to be able to ask the question, you are not a particle. It's like saying, like asking a lottery winner why they didn't lose the lottery. It's like saying most people don't win the lottery, or most people who play the lottery lose the lottery. But the lottery winner won it, but it's far more likely that they shouldn't have. Right? So it's why am I a human instead of a particle is just because you are. There is no conceivable way for you to imagine the reality or for you to come to the. If you were a particle, you wouldn't ask the question. So the question only makes sense if you are already a human. It seems very silly. I don't understand. That's why I'm sort of dwelling so long on it, because it feels like I must have misunderstood him, because this is clearly crazy. Clearly a crazy argument. But let's try and read on and see maybe I misunderstood it and I'll learn more by reading. Or maybe he's just thrown out two rhetorical questions and the fact that I answered them kind of undermines his argument. Another solution is that certain structures become conscious. Yep, that's mine. But a structure is an abstract entity and there's an untold infinite number of abstract entities. Okay. In that case, the conscious particle problem becomes even worse. Why do I even physically exist? Why am I not a conscious abstract entity? Okay, there's a lot to unpack here. Let's finish the paragraph because of that. Why do I even physically exist? Why am I not a conscious abstract entity? The probability of my physical existence is the number of physical things, finite, divided by the number of abstract things, infinite. Because an infinite quantity divided by infinity has a probability of 0, it becomes mathematically impossible for me to physically exist. Something's not right here. Yes, something isn't right here. It's your logic. So, the probability of your physical existence is the number of physical things divided by the number of abstract things is not true. The probability of your physical existence is 1. You have one data point, and that is your physical existence. You don't get to do this kind of leaps of logic where you say, well, actually, we should... Like in the same way, if we find out, as we have, that our star is... the star on Earth is not the most likely star. The most likely star are, like, over half of all stars, roughly half of all stars, are red dwarfs. They live longer, and so they persist longer, the ones that started to exist. So yeah, if a new red dwarf is born, then it'll survive for a long time, and all of the other types of stars that exist don't. So even though it is the case that our star is less likely than the vast majority of stars, the extrapolation is like, even if you think that should be a significantly interesting thing, which I don't, significantly interesting observation, what we're really, like, what we would answer then is say, well, actually, maybe there's something about living on a yellow star that makes it makes life happen. And in the same way, what we're saying there is that in the concept of abstract entities, maybe there's not an infinite number of abstract entities that cause consciousness. You can create finite subsets of an infinite field. And also, it's not actually clear that there's an infinite number of abstract entities. That's just a conjecture. It sort of depends on how you define an abstract entity, and if you define it broadly enough to make it necessarily infinite, I don't think that this necessarily means that consciousness has to apply to all of these. Certain structures become conscious, but a structure is an abstract entity, and there is an until. Well, certain structures, a subset of the structures, the fact that there are infinitely many structures is completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter. So, this is just an absurd argument. Why do I even physically exist? Why am I not a conscious abstract entity? Because that is the only way you can ask that question. If all of the conscious abstract entities aren't running around asking themselves that question, so it doesn't. The question, trying to do probability like this is just mathematically illiterate. Doesn't sort of understand it's not Bayesian. It's not Bayesian enough. It needs to sort of understand the situation you're already finding yourself, the only data point you have. So, yeah. These proposed explanations for consciousness are called panpsychism. To explain why human beings are conscious, we say everything is conscious. Okay, okay. See, that's clearly showing that he is misrepresenting the second solution. So he's presented two solutions. One proposed solution is that all particles are conscious. Another solution is that certain structures become conscious. And then he goes, these proposed explanations of consciousness are called panpsychism. To explain why human beings are conscious, we say everything is conscious. That is exactly not what this other solution says. Another solution is that certain structures become conscious. So we're not saying that everything is conscious. That is your misreading of, your straw manning of the position. You're essentially insisting that if certain structures become conscious, then all structures become conscious. That's absurd. That's an absurdly weak argument. While it is a logical possibility, it leads to a very strange outcome that our own conscious experience becomes incredibly unlikely or mathematically impossible. It doesn't become mathematically impossible. You're very bad at showing that. My physical existence, the number. Okay, I want to dwell on it because it annoys me when people do math. But the probability of my physical existence is the number of physical things finite divided by the number of abstract things finite. So, no, the probability of your existence is 1. You exist. That is the only thing you can now. Vita algo sum. Think, therefore I am. So, the number of physical things is finite. That kind of depends how you think of it. In the context here we're talking about, it's not just... whatever. Actually, let's not dwell too much on that weird abstraction, because it's already defunct. It's already completely horrendous. There's not an untold infinite number of abstract entities that satisfy the idea that solution that certain structures become conscious. In the same way that there's an infinite number of numbers, but there's only a finite number of numbers that are between 1 and 5, right? Or finite number of integers. There are infinite number of integers, but there's a finite number of integers between 1 and 5. So there's the concepts. Yeah, there's been a leap here, which I feel like he's already run with, which is to say everything is conscious, and that's just absurd. That is an absurd misrepresentation of the solution he's presenting. Another proposed solution is the problem of consciousness is to say that it is an illusion. But if we are allowed to solve the problem that way, all problems can be solved by denying it. It's an unsatisfying approach that explains by explaining away. I mean, that is sort of the... And no, you're not really engaging with the idea here. What does it mean to say it is an illusion? How does the illusion generate? We still have questions, and we still sort of... It's not an unsatisfying approach, except in the way you're doing it. The idea that consciousness is an illusion might mean that what is causing the illusion? What is illusory? What about it is illusory? What about it references the real things? What does it mean to say something is illusory? What does it mean to say that we have experience of something which isn't real? There are so many implications here that I would argue even that the sort of illusionism doesn't actually solve the problem of consciousness, which is maybe his point. It sort of just pushes it a little bit further back. But I would argue that illusionism then can be compatible with the idea that certain states cause consciousness. An emergent property. This brings us at last to a currently popular approach to consciousness, emergence. Yay! Which is, some say consciousness is an emergent property of a complex structure of matter. Certain structures, right? This solution is a bit more plausible because it can at least account for the seeming correlation we see between complex organic beings and consciousness. However, beyond that, problems develop. At what point is a structure complex enough to become conscious? If we take away one particle from the structure, then it must cease to be conscious. Why? If we take away one particle from that structure. What? Why? That denies the concept of... What is this sudden... Okay, let me answer the question. At what point is structure complex enough to be conscious? Unclear. But the idea that we need, if there are different types of consciousness, different states of consciousness, this necessarily means that removing a single particle isn't enough. This sentence implies that what we're saying is that there can only be one state of consciousness, that there can only be one state of matter which leads to consciousness, which is clearly not true. Many different people have different experiences of reality. I would say argue that all of the people I meet are conscious, but that doesn't mean that, as far as I know, of course, let's not get into solipsism, but all of the people I meet are conscious. That clearly means that, and they're conscious in different ways. They have different sets of beliefs, different ways of thinking. So no, if we can take away dozens of particles, hundreds of cells even. You can even cut off large parts of people's brains, and you would argue there's still consciousness. So no, it must not cease to be consciousness. Likewise, there must be unconscious structures where the addition of a single particle causes them to suddenly become conscious. Oh, I see. So that's what he's thinking about. Sorry, I was being a little bit harsh. Only a little bit, as we will go into. Let's finish this paragraph though, let's start over actually. Just give it the full benefit of the doubt, one paragraph at a time. However, beyond that, problems develop. At what point is a structure complex enough to become conscious? If we take away one particle from that structure, then it must cease to be conscious. Likewise, there must be unconscious structures where the addition of a single particle causes them to suddenly become conscious. This also seems weird. But if we say there is no such one particle transition point, this also seems weird. Is that literally your argument? That is literally your argument. To the incredulous, it's only, I don't understand it, so therefore it must be false. Go fuck yourself. Likewise, there must be unconscious structure. This also, but if we say there is no such one particle transition point, then no matter how many, the paradox of the heap, then no matter how many particles we remove from the structure, it must remain conscious, even to the point where there is only a single particle left. At which point we are back to a conscious particle model, where at least some particles must be inherently conscious. These particles must be fundamental; they cannot be built from other material. So literally just restating the paradox of the heap. At what point does a heap begin to exist? Well, clearly, at no point, therefore even a single grain of sand must be a heap. It's a nonsensical argument. Gradual, what's it called, the continuum fallacy? I've basically spent most of this week arguing that fallacies aren't useful, and now I'm like, oh, actually, I really want to point them out every single time I see them. It feels like a fun puzzle game, right? You're reading somebody and you're like, what are you even trying to say? Like, why do you think the argument follows? And you're actually going, yeah, that's kind of the empathy trick, that you're not actually trying to I'm not actually trying to, my goal in asking them what fallacy, or I'm not asking what fallacy, I'm trying to say, what is your thought process? And then I have several examples of thought processes, just so happen to be logically invalid thought processes. But I just have several examples I can draw on. So maybe fallacies are more useful than I gave them credit for. So this is clearly ridiculous. Because of these concepts of gradual change. So in the same way, let's use evolution as an example. So at what point did because the thing about evolution is it does have many of these sort of moments of change, these mutations, but speciation is what I'm trying to get at here. At one point does one species become another species? And the biological definition is when they cannot have offspring that can reproduce, that can themselves have offspring. So, if every horse's ancestor was also a horse, because you need, like, it's a chicken and egg problem. If you need a chicken to lay an egg, then everything that laid an egg for a chicken must be a chicken, going all the way back to the dinosaurs. And then you're suddenly like, well, clearly Archaeopteryx is actually a chicken. And I'm like, no, that's not how distinctions work. It's not how categories work. Like this also seems, so, okay, so we're talking about this one particle transition point. So what I'm saying is that I want to draw this. I don't need that. I can draw it on paint as we like. And so what we're talking about here, come on, there we go. That one is on my screen, I assume. Yeah, that's on my screen. Okay. So one particle transition point. So let us say, so sort of, we'll make a graph, because that's what I was thinking of, and we'll label the axis complexity. Oh, I'm going to use the drawing thing after all. It's so much easier to do. Is it not connected? There we go. Complexity. So the idea is, as something becomes more and more complex over time, that at a certain point in time, he's thinking, here, consciousness happens. But, so the idea here then must be that consciousness is so radically different from non-consciousness that it cannot possibly be gradually existent. And I think that's a misapprehension. I think you can easily imagine things that have certain of the attributes of being conscious. Sort of, certain animals have a degree of self-awareness, certain animals have a level of planning. Like there is a very gradual change when you look at the different types of animals. You see many different levels of ways that sort of hint of thinking. And like at the extreme end, you have amoeba who don't seem to think at all, who like conceptually cannot. And like as we get closer and closer to humans, you get things like crows and octopi and things like animals who display some level of cognition. So yeah, sure. I guess that's maybe what's happening here. If you think of it as suddenly consciousness happens, consciousness being a separate concept from cognition. But if you think of consciousness as being very good cognition, then gradualism comes into play. So at what point then? What particle we have to add to make it so that it's conscious rather than non-conscious is just an arbitrary line, in much the same way as the distinction between the horse and the donkey, or the ape and the human, right? Where, yeah. Otherwise, we are back at the emergent consciousness model. Yeah. We are. So I'm assuming he means to say something else. We're back at the emergent conscious. I'm assuming what he means to say is that it is the all particles are conscious model. All right. Or what he's saying here is actually, otherwise we are back at the model. Oh, he's thinking you end up in an infinite loop here. Because if not, he just says, well, what's the one particle transition point? Well, the one particle transition point is how whatever arbitrariness we decide to say, which level of cognition is sufficient to cause consciousness. And almost certainly an octopus or a pig or these sort of semi-intelligent animals have some degree of consciousness. And I would argue that it's clear that these have clearly have a larger degree of like my pet, a dog, has more consciousness than a fly, but a fly has more consciousness than an amoeba, right? It's like and with an amoeba has more consciousness. I would argue, even maybe that's just putting it very much to the point, than a virus, which is sort of non-living. Maybe like this is pre-cognition, so maybe sort of. Maybe that's also an argument. Like, at which point does cognition happen? Is it when the first nerve cell happens? Or is it when the first two nerve cells happen? How many nerve cells do you need to have cognition? But still, it seems to emerge, right? Yeah, no, I don't. There's no weirdness here. Because I know that name, Eric Holloway. I don't know if that means I know him because I already hate him, but let's look it up now, just to be sure. Wait, what? Not Holloway, but Holloway. Wait, he's a Discovery Institute guy? Are you kidding? No wonder he's an idiot. Oh dear. And this was quoted. Wait a second. Wait a second. We're going to go back to you after school. What's his name? Dr. God, what were we talking about? So, I'm just going to show you what I'm looking at. Whoop, whoop. So, this is what we were watching, and towards the end, we sort of... There we go.
That this is a topic, they're not just inside our heads. Now, it may seem astonishing that this is a topic of debate in the 21st century. We know so little about our own minds that where our image...
Yeah, it was. Literally, you're quoting a creationist as supporter. I mean, talk about bad company. Jesus Christ. Okay, let's continue reading. So where did the conscious particles come from? They either must have existed since the very beginning on their own accord, since nothing else can create them, or they pop in and out of existence randomly. I know that I certainly have not existed since the Big Bang, so that disproves the first option. The second option is possible, but our existence seems to be highly predictable. It correlates with the existence of biological organisms. They're not constant. Organisms die. It's certainly not random. Well, certainly not random. They certainly don't experience it as random, but people regularly experience not random phenomena as non-random. See the gambler's fallacy. A conscious particle model can be a viable idea only if the conscious particles are brought in and out of existence by a non-random cause that transcends the material universe. But in that case, we're no longer dealing with a purely material theory of consciousness, because the source of conscious particle. So I feel like this is what he's getting at, given now that we looked up that he's from the Discovery Institute. He's sort of rejecting the other models of consciousness because this is probably what he believes, that God creates the mechanism by which we can have consciousness. Whereas I definitely think it's just an extension of cognition, which is itself very clearly gradual. We have very definite examples of people having gradual definitely not people, of animals with varying degrees of cognition. And so if consciousness is simply lots and lots of cognition, then we have the gradual properties we need. In the same way, he's struggling with the idea that how can this happen, but all we don't, and I understand that that's a problem for someone who's a creationist, but I'm realizing I have to sort of adjust the way I'm thinking, because he's not going to accept the biological theory of the correct biological theory of evolution. So I'm sort of adjusting it so that we can make clear that it's not just because of the gradualism of evolution, it's because of even if they were all created as is, we should be able to infer from the observation that there are varying degrees of cognition, and these varying degrees of cognition give animals varying aspects of self-awareness and tool use and planning for the future. Like varying degrees of cognition are essentially what consciousness is. So all of the aspects we have of consciousness, if you try and sort of pick at it and see, like, well, what exactly is consciousness? What do we mean when we say and we are conscious? You pick at sort of these attributes of experiences and so on. The more you pick at it, funnily enough, he's simply arguing that consciousness is irreducibly complex. Whereas I would argue that it is reducible to a variety of cognitive processes. We see now, okay. We see why there is no coherent material theory of consciousness, at least not among the current theories out there. Panpsychism, illusionism, and emergence. All such theories either deny the very thing they are trying to explain, result in absurd scenarios, or require an immaterial intervention. Bound up with attempts to study immaterial things while denying them. Clearly not a degree in consciousness or philosophy. These arguments are completely abhorrent. How is it possible? Who knows and who cares? Same way that a bunch of particles that are not alive. I should have realized from the beginning. How is it possible that a bunch of particles that are devoid of consciousness can get together and cause consciousness? And my answer was life. A bunch of particles that are devoid of life. And he's going to say, well, God gives us a spark of life, the anima. But this doesn't actually solve the problem because you haven't found the anima. You've just sort of said that it exists, insisted that it must exist because you can't imagine the alternative. And it's like, to me, we build robots. We make clockwork machines. How is it possible that we can have motion in such a predictable, like my calculator? How is it possible that it can know all of these things? How is it possible that it can think, do these calculations? It's a mechanism. It's a complex mechanism. Your inability to understand things is not evidence of anything other than your inability to understand things. So let's see if we have someone who is not a proven con artist and go into psychology today, which is a source that I've actually heard of, which probably gives me a little bit less reason to be. Weirdly though, it's like I've heard of Eric Holloway, and of course I've heard of creationists. I've spent way too much time arguing with creationists. Where am I? I'm going to open. There we go. So, let's try another one. A stimulating debate on consciousness and the brain. Scientists from around the world gather to debate theories of consciousness. Key points. Oh, it's in part two. Oh god. In discussing existing theories of consciousness, a group of scientists also attempts to define what a theory should predict and account for. Scientists sometimes present falsifiable hypotheses, educated guesses that can be proven false when building a theory. Sometimes is incorrect. They always. That's a necessary component of how science works. In theory building, the definite definition of a phenomenon is the end and not the beginning of scientific inquiry. What? That's an interesting concept, but... Okay, let's see what the other one is about. Can projective geometry help explain consciousness? Okay, well, we'll see if we have to read it. We'll start by reading the one here. Well, actually, let's read the key points. Oh, it doesn't have key points. Oh, it's much shorter as well. Is this... Oh, so here is the actual paper and not just the... Not just the articles. Giulio Tononi's integrated information theory proposes explaining consciousness by directly identifying it with integrated information. We examine the construct validity of IIT's measure of consciousness, phi, by analyzing its formal properties. its relations to key aspects of consciousness, and its covariation with relevant empirical circumstances. Analysis shows that IIT's identification of consciousness with the causal efficacy with which differentiated networks accomplish global information transfer, which is what theta in fact measures, is mistaken. Misidentification has the consequence of requiring the attribution of consciousness to a range of natural systems and artifacts that include, but are not limited to, large-scale electrical power grids, gene regulation networks, some electronic circuit boards, and social networks. Instead of treating this consequence of the theory as disconfirmation, IIT embraces it. That would be interesting. Yeah, I mean, that was my first thought as well. Like, that might be possible. It might be a relevantly interesting thing to say that these systems are the most basic forms of consciousness that can exist. By regarding these systems as barriers of consciousness, ex hypothesi, IIT is led towards the orbit of panpsychist ideation. Having just read about what panpsychism is, that's not true. He's saying the statement is, it's certain systems. Why are people making the same mistake? The departure from science as we know it can be avoided by recognizing the functional misattribution at the heart of IIT's identity claim. We show, for example, what function is actually performed, at least in the human case, by the cortical combination of differentiation with integration that IIT identifies with consciousness. Finally, we examine what lessons might be drawn for IIT's failure to provide a credible account of consciousness for progress in the very active field of research concerned with exploring the phenomena from formal and neural points of view. This departure from science as we know can be avoided by recognizing functional misattribution. Show, for example, that function is actually performed, at least in the human case, by the cortical combination. Okay, I'm sure it's a very interesting article, but let's read this then. Scientists from around the world have gathered to discuss theories about consciousness. Discuss theories about consciousness and the brain. Now, what could be more enthralling topic? This took place in the open peer-reviewed journal Behavioral and Brain Sciences. Not only are the scientists discussing existing theories of consciousness and the brain, but they are also discussing how such theories should be, for example, and what they should predict and account for. How such theories should be, for example, how these theories should be, for example, what they should predict and account for. Okay. In some cases, the contributors of the discussion are educating the reader about how theories in general should be and how theory building should progress. Hence, this is a great contribution not only to the study of consciousness and the brain, but to science in general. Challenging topics such as quantum phenomena and consciousness really do cause a theorist to think deeply about what a theory should do at a certain stage of understanding of a given phenomenon. The article is a wonderful debate that really brings one up to date on the different views regarding the mysterious phenomenon of consciousness. Yeah, interesting. When I think about my own career, I wonder how much I must have learned by having senior scientists debate about things, even about mundane things, as scientists often find even the most everyday observations to hold some deep secrets about the nature of life and reality. By observing such debates, one learns not only about the phenomena being discussed, but also how to debate and present ideas in an informed, conservative, and constructive way. Discussions in which there were disagreements about a hypothesis were followed by a friendly cup of coffee. Okay. I mean, you should be able to have that even if you have a destructive conversation. In this particular open peer review article, the authors of the target article present their thesis, and this is then followed by the many commentaries of researchers from around the globe. My lab contributed to these commentaries. It was an honor for us to contribute to the discussion. So I had to do a very long introduction to explain his potential bias in this case. But yeah. After the commentaries, the authors present what I call the author's reply, in which they address all the comments presented by the many scientists. What I found very interesting about this article is that, when discussing a prominent theory regarding consciousness and the brain, the authors took the time to mention some alternative approaches, one of which seems quite promising. Let's open. Oh, it is the same way. Okay. When I teach my students about science and its process, because in my book science is more a process than a body of knowledge, in my work, in all work, science, that's how science is. Philosophically, understanding that is quite useful. It's not how people think of it, but I always remind students that in scientific discourse, one discusses and challenges ideas versus challenging people, the famous ad hominem fallacy in rhetoric. I also remind them that in the theory building, scientists sometimes present falsifiable hypotheses, educated guesses that can be proven false. They have to. If it's not falsifiable, then it's unscientific. That will lead to important research and new insights, but that the scientists proposing them might not consider them to be the final story. They should. Well, no, they never. Our understanding means they never can be. In one case, a hypothesis that led to many insights was presented by a scientist who was uncertain regarding how much water the hypothesis could hold. Others believed more in the hypothesis than she did. There are many famous cases of this. She said to me something of the effect, "If I was certain about what was true, then I would not need to do research to test my ideas." Good. Some scientists love ideas and insights, and they are often not surprised when Mother Nature proves them false. Focusing on them makes the scientific process more efficient. It is the basis of the scientific process. The falsificationism is inherently, this is philosophy of science 101. Another interesting insight is that, in theory building, the definite definition of a phenomenon is the end and not the beginning of scientific inquiry, as was stated by Sir Karl Popper. Yay! He's referencing it. In the beginning, one needs only an identification or an operational definition, which is not the final definition. Another researcher who studies jealousy told me that if she had a complete definition of jealousy, then the topic would no longer need to be studied. Yeah. I mean, that's sort of an interesting back and forth there, but yeah. Regarding this new discussion regarding consciousness and the brain, it is clear that the field still has some way to go before we can have a complete definition of consciousness. I view this as an exciting fact. How many more counterintuitive things will we learn on this road to the complete definition of what we are? This is an enthralling. So this was also, so unlike the other one, this doesn't actually support the video. Like,
images is up in the our heads, stand out over astronomical distances. They're not just inside our heads. Now, it may seem astonishing that this is a topic of debate in the 21st century.
This is not the topic of this debate. This is clearly just, I want to report it for misinformation, honestly. This is awful. And this isn't Rupert Sheldrake, who has his own weird logical errors, but this is after school posting these two articles, one of which was a creationist and the other one which has nothing to do with what he's talking about. He's just saying that consciousness...
We know so little about our own minds that where our images are is a hot topic.
He's using it to sort of stir up the idea that there's this big controversy, and then he goes into what uses a completely different idea of what the controversy is. What the controversy, the stimulating debate, the uncertainty about consciousness in scientific terms is absolutely not what he's presenting it to be. This is horrendous. Well, at least we know that Dr. Rupert is a crazy person. So let's read what Alex Gomez Martin says about it. Despite the triumphant rhetoric of mechanistic materialism, current biology has no shortage of unsolved fundamental problems. Yeah, okay. In 1981, seeking a way forward, Rupert Sheldrake proposed the hypothesis of formative causation as a unifying organizing principle of life. Expanding the concept of morphogenetic fields, Sheldrake posited a spatiotemporal connection termed morphic resonance, whereby the more often a self-organizing process takes place, the easier it will be for it to take place in the future. After initial acclaim, his project was quickly met with dogmatic skepticism, dismissed as scientific heresy, and ultimately ignored for good reason. 40 years later, the experimental implications of his ideas remain largely untested. Well, that's because his proposed tests are confirmations, not falsifications. Visionary or not, Sheldrake's case illustrates the conceptual resistance of the scientific enterprise to revise its own deepest theoretical commitments. Beyond career-building selection pressures, young researchers need to be presented with the major questions in their field and encouraged to entertain radically alternative points of view. Science is what scientists make of it. Flip this around. Ask yourself, does Sheldrake stand to gain from any of this? Yes, he stands to gain more than any of the scientists who criticize him. Being a contrarian pseudoscientist is the most profitable thing a scientist can do. As demonstrated by the fact that Graham, not a scientist though, because he hates being called a pseudo-dolphin, pseudo-fish, but Graham Hancock makes a lot more money than any other archaeologists. So clearly, if you want to make more money, you just write creatively and pretend it's not creative writing. Okay. Wait, is he? Okay, Sir John Maddox, not Maddox the YouTuber who's recently been a little bit controversy around. Some bold scientific ideas are celebrated as works of genius, others as crackpot speculation. The first category is reserved for a very small minority. Yet, at first glance, paradigm-changing science can be indistinguishable from pseudoscience. No, well, yes, at first glance, but well, that's why we... The reception of Rupert Sheldrake, it depends who you are. I would argue that I've spent most of my life, all of my adult life, exceptionally curious about and constantly delving into not just pseudoscience, but all the ways in which human thinking can be wrong. So to me, the idea that can be indistinguishable is not exactly true. As long as somebody presents the theory, I go through it and I like, well, actually there's some very clear hints. The reception of Rupert Sheldrake's book, A New Science of Life, published 40 years ago this year, remains an illuminating example of the full range of possible responses to seemingly improbable new ideas. That's not the problem. They lack explanatory potential. Or not just explanatory potential, they lack predictive potential. If his theory makes a prediction that it would falsify it if it was proven wrong, then and only then is it scientific. If it doesn't, it is pseudoscience. When Einstein made general relativity, paradigm shifting, the biggest paradigm shift in recent memory, he predicted that you would see the light of stars bend around the sun. If this didn't happen, he would have thought of a new theory or been wrong. He could disprove his own theory. He thought of an example which could disprove his theory, rather than thinking of we should open the video again. Well, did I close it? I did close it. Can I Control-Shift-T or does that not do it? No, it doesn't do it. There it it does do it. Excellent. So, where were we? There we go. So, we're talking about how he lacks this. That's what I was talking about. This. So, if the argument is this observation should happen, and if it doesn't happen, there's something wrong with my theory, then it would be a falsifiable scientific theory. But since the argument is, well, this is what I expect would happen, I'm just curious to see if it does, then you're sort of saying, well, then you need to be able to disprove your own theory. If you don't have a way to disprove your own theory, then you don't have a scientific theory. You just have philosophy, which is all well and good. But as we noticed when we talked to philosophers, they've gone deep into the dictionary. You have to fight with people who spend a lot of time thinking very hard about a lot of things. So I can understand why someone might not want to do that. Sheldrake's ideas were controversial from the outset. An editorial in Nature by Sir John Maddox deemed Sheldrake's book to be the best candidate for burning there has been for many years. I didn't. I prefer scientists. Philosophers can also sometimes do it, but scientists are so much more fun. Oh, good. There's Graham Hancock. We can go into more. I'm probably just gonna do pseudoscience on these streams in the future. It's a fascinating field because there's so many weird pseudoscientific beliefs, and it's so, so typically, and it's so much less likely that I get embarrassed because I'm always hypercritical. All ideas I meet are hypercritical. So when you give me a scientific theory I haven't heard of yet, I go, no, that's insane, or no, that's crazy. Like when the first time I heard about climate change, we were doing climate change in high school, I rejected it. I immediately came to the conclusion, nah, actually the cycles are different. And I wrote that in a paper, I gave it to my physics teacher. My physics teacher said, oh, that's cool, I'd like to see that, but there is an explanation for, actually, she didn't say there is an explanation. She said, that's cool, I would like to see those graphs. I looked up those graphs, and those graphs had the explanation to it. So I had made a fool of myself by not reading it properly. And these things happen all the time when I deal with science, but when I deal with pseudoscience, typically the response isn't to show me actually how wrong I was. It's been to show me, it's consistently to complain that I am overly critical. Whereas scientists don't care if I'm overly critical. Apart from in the sort of social sense, it's annoying to talk to someone who's so critical. But in the sense of me writing articles online, yeah, no, they don't. I mean, the closest I've got was somebody who complained that surely I'm allowed to write a polemic. And when she said that, I stopped talking, and I was like, I didn't delete my comments, which I maybe should have. I want to be embarrassed. So I think if I delete comments like that, I sort of get the wrong impression about how willing I should be to make mistakes. But yeah, so that's a big digression, but I think this has proven to me that I should read more pseudoscience on these streams, because it's a fun and interesting topic. It's what I've been spending most of my life. I really need to get that book back. Or I can't just buy another one. I can't afford it. Somebody donate to me. Somebody join my... I don't know if that's possible. But, yeah. Somebody send me why people believe weird things. I need to reference it. Let's go bathroom and then we'll continue with Mr. Maddox. So yes, let's get back to it. An editorial... Sheldrake's ideas were controversial from the outset. An editorial in Nature by Sir John Maddox deemed Sheldrake's book to be the best candidate for burning there has been for many years. Later, Maddox commented that Sheldrake is putting forward magic instead of science, and that can be condemned in exactly the language that the Pope used to condemn Galileo, and for the same reason, it is heresy. That's a funny way of putting it, yeah. It's heresy against science, against the scientific method. But of course, this is the kind of quote that someone like Sheldrake would absolutely put on his book. Despite his track record as an innovative plant scientist at Cambridge and at an international agricultural research institute in India, Sheldrake was excommunicated from the mainstream scientific community. Yeah, I mean, he's clearly presenting a theory which is unscientific, so puts a little bit of extra suspicion on how he arrives at his theories. A reasonable amount of suspicion, I would argue. Maddox's memorable verdict was unfortunately dogmatic. Sheldrake's book was not anti-science, but rather an attempt to face up to a number of open questions in biology, many of which, 4 decades later, remain largely unanswered. Regarding development of the book, argued for the insufficiency of molecular explanations, a prescient observation in light of the recent findings of how bioelectric fields pre-pattern morphogenesis, and that's not sourced. He sources who is Alex? I don't know. I think it's a she, but I'm not exactly sure. Oh. Actually, we can just do they. Okay, I'm gonna open it in a different one just in case. Yeah, I mean, he, she, they. We'll just call them they. So yeah, they source things, but these sort of recent findings showing that's a source. You need that. You really need that, especially if you're saying it's prescient. I mean, really need that source here. There needs to be a number right here. With regard to cognitive neuroscience, Sheldrake proposed new mechanisms of learning and memory, prompted by the ongoing struggle to locate memory traces in the brain. The quest for the engram continues to this day. In evolution, Sheldrake entertained the prospect that acquired characteristics might be inherited, then one of biology's biggest taboos, now largely accepted thanks to research on epigenetic inheritance. So much for the problems. What was his solution? Epigenetics was scientifically formulated. It's disprovable. I think this is a very generous painting of it, but it's like this statement here. Sheldrake's book was not anti-science, but rather an attempt to face up to a number of open questions. Like, this does not contradict this. An attempt to face up to a number of open questions in biology can still be anti-science. Creationism is anti-science, and it tries to answer the question of abiogenesis. So you seem to have sort of, it seems to me that somebody here is a little bit attached to their own theory, and when other people are attached to their own theories, the insistence is that it's dogmatic, and it's sort of an argument of dogmas against dogmas. But yeah, this isn't to take it seriously, the criticism, nor is it to sort of be aware of what is necessary for science to be science. Sheldrake argued for the so much for the problems. So much for the problems. The problems were none of the above. Nothing here justifies so much for the problems. Unless what is said here implies that, oh, well, his theory is naturally correct. The problems haven't been answered, nor have they even been fielded. And Sheldrake is putting forward magic instead of science. That problem is not answered. New mechanisms of learning and memory. Yes, God did it. There's also a new mechanism for learning and memory, right? You can make anti-scientific things that satisfy all of these. Prescient observation, right? Argued for the insufficiency of molecular explanations. Creationists do that too. Prescient observation in light of recent findings show pre-pattern morphogenesis. That one I need a source for, because what do they actually is biological process, right? So bioelectric fields pre-pattern morphogenesis. What do they mean by, okay, I'm gonna bioelectric fields pre-pattern search. And this also doesn't necessarily, I mean, if it might give him a mechanism, I guess, that there's a mechanism for the biology of it. The sort of general thesis, the sort of physics part of it, is in no way justified by any of this. I suppose. I mean, that's kind of the problem, is his theory isn't just a biological theory, isn't just a neuroscience theory, it's a wholesale theory of science. It's a wholesale it's a grand unified theory of everything. And obviously it's not as mathematically detailed as the other grand unified theories of everything. But that's why I argue, or what I write here, well, whatever. I wrote a comment here to the effect, this is metaphysics masquerading as science. This is how, the idea is that he's presenting a model which is bigger than simply the biology. Sheldrake argued for the existence of a memory principle in nature, supported by a radical reinterpretation of morphogenetic fields, an established concept within developmental biology as a previously unrecognized type of form-shaping field. So previously unrecognized type of field in general. It's not just... Yeah, okay, well, he's arguing that something exists which we don't know of yet. Well, test it. Give us the falsifying test. What would Sheldrake need to see to reject the existence of a form-shaping field? By means of a process he termed morphic resonance, a similarity-based non-local connection across time. Sheldrake hypothesized that the more frequently any self-organizing natural phenomenon occurs, the easier it will be for it to occur again in the future. In this view, the laws of nature might be more like law habits than eternal edicts. And see, that's where it's unscientific. You're saying I'm sitting here saying how to test it, and you're saying, well, actually, it's not so definitive that it can be tested in such a way. Well, then it's unscientific. It's just metaphysics. Enjoy your metaphysics. Don't bring it into science. Don't pretend it's science. And by pretending it's science, enjoy losing all credibility you have ever had as a scientist. A single mistake can disprove a theory, and a single mistake can discredit a scientist. It doesn't matter how well you worked before, as long as if you stop working, then we no longer use you. Same with theories, same with scientists. In an evolutionary universe, why not entertain the idea of evolving laws? We do, just not these one, or not based on... The idea of evolving laws are being entertained. Non-locality is being entertained. I've gotten several... I think it was Anton Petrov, I don't know if it's Sabine Hossenfelder also did it, maybe Dr. Becky Smetters also did it. There are several scholars I follow, several physicists I follow on YouTube, who have posted videos on the possibilities of a non-local universe. So I don't... and also in an evolutionary universe, it's such a stretch. It's such a stretch of language. In a changing universe, why not entertain the idea of changing laws? Right? Let's translate it to simple English. as I wanted to do with the philosophy thing as well. In a changing universe, why not entertain the idea of changing laws? Because they are predictably useless. Does this idea make testable predictions? Oh, yes. Okay, good. For example, train rodents to solve a task in Lisbon, and other rodents in Boston should solve it more quickly. Crystallize a chemical... So if they don't, then that would disprove the theory, right? Crystallize a chemical compound for the first time, and it should become progressively easier to do. That would happen regardless of whether your theory is true, unless you also deny people access to the information. Or if somebody does something and they doing it several times makes them better at it. Expose cells to a stress to which they adapt, and subsequent similar cells should adapt faster. All subsequent similar cells, including ones not connected to the body, unless you mean that similarity is necessary, right? It's too vague. Would it be disproven if you test, for instance, my skin cells, I do this every day. So let's say I do this every day, and so my skin becomes rougher in the area because I'm like applying friction, roughening it up, like the soles of my feet, hard skin under there. Should I expect the more I rub my hand, the harder the skin on my elbow becomes, or the harder the skin on my neck becomes, or like does this the increased tension of that expect? And if we don't observe that, would that disprove the theory? Let's take it even a step further, because it's not just my skin cells. My skin cells are obviously similar to my other skin cells, and you could propose a scientific mechanism for why me being exposed to extra friction, a materialistic mechanistic mechanism for why this happens. A materialistic mechanism for why this happens. But what you couldn't explain from the past theory, something that is new, a prediction that only his theory could possibly make, is the idea that me rubbing my skin cells might make somebody else's skin cells harder, or evolve to resist the same sort of rubbing. And to me, this seems like it automatically fails, because people all across the world are exposed to all different kinds of stimulus, and none of this stimulus translates back to me. I am not changed in any significant. So either the effect is so small or so disparate that we can't test it unless we have a very hyper-specific one, or it can better be explained by the current materialistic processes. So it fails because I don't think the idea of falsification is being here. It should predict what happens to a more certain extent. You need to be more specific. You don't need to say, well, it has to be exactly at this value, this amount of change. But if these are your predictions, then okay, well, fair enough. If we test it, if we train rodents to solve a task in Lisbon, and the other rodents in Boston solve it the same rate or more slowly. Yesterday I drew a graph going up and down, kind of like this. Shouldn't that, if we observe this being the amount of time the rats take to train, shouldn't that itself, if that discredits the theory, then it's falsifiable, then it's testable. If not, it's just him looking for confirmation. Confirmation bias is not testability. Does not testability make? Crystallize a chemical compound for the first time, it should be progressively easier to do. This can be explained by our current understanding. Expose the cells to stress to which they adapt can either be explained by our current phenomena or is patently untrue. So controversy aside, 40 years later, actually I should take a moment here. The fact is that when you are coming up with a paradigm shift, the goal is to explain more things than the previous theory can explain. So you don't just predict more than the previous theory can explain. You need to make testable, falsifiable predictions, and if you can do that better than the past theory, you can predict and explain or predict things that the past theory can't, and also can predict the things that the past theory can, then and only then is your theory going to be accepted, or have any hope of being accepted. If it's simply another way of looking at things which can explain the same things, then it has no real value to us. Unless, I mean, you could find out that maybe the maths are easier to do, and if you do that, go ahead, by all means, do as much math as you can. If it turns out that it is more mathematically useful to use morphogenetic resonance, it's not morphogenetic, it's morphic resonance, that's his theory. If it's more practical to use morphic resonance as a theory than other models, then in whatever context, because it's such a broad theory, then sure, you can it might be taken over, but it needs to be able to explain all of the other things as well as new things, and we're not going to reject the old explanations unless it has some advantage. It's not, let's be ultra cynical about this. We're not actually interested in the truth, we're interested in useful theories, useful models. We're interested in trying to make predictions, make things, really, like the prediction of like Newtonian mechanics, right? We can use this knowledge to build cannons, to throw rocks through trebuchets. Like, we can use this understanding productively to make accurate prediction. And if the trebuchet rock just flies up into the air, then we know something is wrong with the theory. Or indeed, if the trebuchet doesn't go as far, or indeed any such thing, we should. Yeah. So, not clear that this does make testable predictions, but let's go on. Controversy aside, 40 years later, there is evidence. Where is the evidence for morphic resonance? It is not overwhelming. This is not because the open questions Sheldrake identified have been definitely answered. That is very, very bad form. Very, very bad form. Because so what if the questions haven't been answered? To our understanding, Sheldrake hasn't answered the previous questions. That's what the evidence is necessary for. Sheldrake has failed to explain the phenomena we already see in his eager attempt to explain phenomena we don't yet understand. And so that's fine if it's a metaphysical understanding of reality. It's not fine if it's masquerading as science. Nor is it for lack of potential experiments and testable predictions. The appendix to the new edition of Sheldrake's book contains 10 experiments ranging from low temperature physics to the melting point of crystals to the spread of Bates shyness in rats and accelerated human learning. The problem is almost none of these experiments have been performed. Technical feasibility is not enough to pursue a scientific research program. A high-profile ruling of heresy hinders the ability to obtain funding, to have lab and students, and to expect cordial behavior from scientific colleagues and peer reviewers. Sheldrake's approach has been to focus on experiments that can be performed by civilian scientists on a shoestring budget, rather than sophisticated and expensive laboratory investigations. He and a few others have also carried out small-scale morphic resonance experiments in the field of human learning, and with some positive but disputed results. The outcome? His hypothesis remains largely untested. Whatever one makes of Sheldrake's ideas, his story reveals something about how the sciences proceed. Indeed it does. It's called a paradigm shift, as Kuhn described it. The history of science is peppered with heretics. Galileo, yes, honestly, okay, this is a massive red flag. Heresy speaking about how it's not a bad thing to be a heresy, especially after sort of, okay, we'll get back to it, because this is interesting in context of what Dr. Maddox says earlier. Galileo is a classic example, as Maddox pointed out, apparently blind to the irony. No, I'll explain to you what he meant afterwards. The physicist David Bohm, who was sympathetic to Sheldrake's proposal, is another, the man Einstein called his spiritual son, and whose ideas so perturbed Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, that he remarked, "If we cannot disprove Bohm, then we must agree to ignore him." Scientists are great. It's just sad when people like this don't understand what they're saying. But yeah, this is literally just name dropping. A recent case is the astronomer Avi Loeb, also a pseudoscientific hack, a professor of science at Harvard whose openness to entertaining evidence of extraterrestrial intelligent life has become a subject of bad-tempered dispute because he's an incredulous hack. Some heretics turn out to be right, others do not. The jury is still out on Sheldrake, Bohm, and Loeb. No, it's not. Meanwhile, Sheldrake's book, now available in a revised and updated edition, remains a source of stimulation for new generations of researchers, both through the questions it asks and the possibilities it proposes. Interesting. So it's Spanish, maybe. I'm curious. Yeah. Ah, excellent. We can watch that. A book for burning. I would rather read this book than Sheldrake, but I have to read Sheldrake's book if I'm going to read those kinds of books. It's not more fun. It's a lot more fun if you actually know the theory as presented by the person. But okay, let's go back to the thing I wanted to mention. Galileo is a classic example, Maddox pointed out, blind to the irony. So what he's saying in the beginning here, Sheldrake is putting forward magic instead of science, and that can be condemned in exactly the language that the Pope used to condemn Galileo, and for the same reason, right? So the idea here being that instead of being heretical to the church, it's heretical to the scientific method. So if you are heretical to the scientific method, you should be rejected as pseudoscience. That's not science. It's philosophy. It's fine philosophy. It's not really that great philosophy, but it's decent. It's a good pop philosophy book, I'd say. Or probably, I haven't read it, but it seems like Sheldrake's ideas are curious and interesting philosophical ideas. They just don't seem to have any scientific merit. They seem to insist on... okay, let me make a more clear example of why it seems so biased, this sort of experimentalism. So there's an article I just read yesterday, off stream I believe, by Michael Shermer. What was it? In Scientific American. Oh, they actually did a debate on the Institute of Art and Ideas. That's interesting. But Rupert's Resonance is the article. And this is such a great start. Have you ever noticed how much easier it is to do a newspaper crossword later in the day? Me neither. But according to Rupert Sheldrake, it is because the collective successes of the morning resonate through the cultural morphic field. So this is also a prediction, and it's trivially falsifiable. Or indeed, it's testable, and you can test the illusionary of it. I was thinking you could actually get the phenomena if people more tired are worse than people who are more awake, which is reasonable. It just seems to me that we're not really making... It's making... When I'm saying testable predictions, it means, well, there are predictions I make, and if true, they justify my belief, but if false, then they don't discredit it. And that's not a testable prediction. That is just confirmation bias with a fancy name. Curious about this. How long
His immodestly titled book, A New Science of Life, was the result. It was sent for review to the journal Nature, widely regarded as the world's most influential science magazine. The book was read by Nature's editor-in-chief, John Maddox, who denounced it in a dramatic editorial, and in terms that echoed the medieval church's condemnation of religious heretics.
I was so offended by it that I said that while it's wrong that books should be burned,
it's wrong that books should be burned.
In practice, if book burning were allowed, this book would be a candidate.
What was that? Did you just did it just flash on screen the
practice
opposite?
if book said that while it's wrong that books should be burned,
He said, while it's wrong that books should be burned, and the text on screen is books should be burned, whoever made this should be shot.
in practice...
No, don't do it. I shouldn't say that when I like to say it, be extreme when I'm talking to myself, but I'm realizing I have to remind myself I am putting videos out here. Nobody should shoot anyone, but this is such a gross misrepresentation of someone that this video should be burned 100%. While it is wrong that that speech should be prevented, this kind of speech should be prevented. Maddox sues this channel for slander or libel, that would be good.
Burning were allowed, this book would be a candidate. I think it's dangerous that people should be allowed by our liberal societies to put that kind of nonsense into currency. It's unnecessary to introduce magic into the explanation of physical and biological phenomena, when in fact there's every likelihood that the continuation of research as it's now practiced will indeed fill all the gaps that Sheldrake draws attention to. You see...
Oh, this is like he says earlier. Science delete.
In principle, leaving only the details to be filled in.
So, I'm sure when Sheldrake heard this, he was thinking, this is the science solution. That's what he's presenting here is different from what he says here. Let's listen to it again.
There's every likelihood that the continuation of research as it's now practiced will indeed fill all the gaps.
So this is not to say that only the details need to be filled in. This is to say that the process and the mechanism of science as it is currently cannot, as a materialistic science, can, in theory, determine all of the models of reality. This is not the same to say that all the details need to be filled in. But I guess to Rupert Sheldrake it is, because he's trying to conceive of an entirely new way of knowing things beyond science, beyond the material study of things, beyond the mechanistic study of things. The scientific dogmas are correct. The scientific dogmas are useful and necessary attributes of how science works. His rejection of some of these scientific dogmas is a rejection of the method of science in favor of the method of magic. He is Rupert Sheldrake is advocating for nonsense. Yeah. Good on you, Mr. Maddox, or Dr. Maddox.
Is immodestly
So I agree 100% with Letter Squash. So let's see what Chris C. says. There is nothing magic about any word that Sheldrake wrote. Classical science is looking at the materialistic data of the world, leaving the most important aspect out of the equation. The thing that is needed to do science in the first place, awareness. How ill is that? What most people don't realize is how extraordinarily dogmatic they wrote extraordinary, but extraordinarily dogmatic the scientific world actually is. The dominant orthodoxy controls the funding, the positions, the journals, the peer review system. If your view doesn't suit in, you're out. That's worse than religion. Let's write some. It's a 5-year-old thing. Let's trigger this motherfucker. if I'm gonna write this, I have to actually read the book, and I'm not gonna read the book. The more I read about it, the more I might. Okay, biological from ancient. Oh yeah, cell to cell, ancient mechanism sharing. Honestly, as soon as you look things up, that's what happened when I looked up the two other articles. Is that it doesn't support his theory, or I mean, the one who supported his theory was a fucking creationist, and even he, I'm very much doubt would insist on this theory. It is very much crazy shit. Yeah. It's not even a hypothesis. It's not even wrong. Not even wrong. Okay, let's actually read it from his own mouth. Morphic resonance is a process whereby self-organizing systems. Okay, actually, it's too small. Let's scroll in. It's a process whereby self-organizing systems inherit memory from the previous similar systems, and define similarity. In its most general formulation, morphic resonance means the so-called laws of nature are more like habits. Okay, you keep insisting on this, but this is the most unscientific part of your whole theory. It is a rejection of testability, really. It's a rejection of cause and effect, or of our ability to test and study cause and effect. So even if it's true, it's irrelevant, it's pointless, it's worthless, it's unscientific, pseudoscience. Unscientific things pretending to be science, draping themselves in the veneer of it. But it's inherently rejecting the concept of a deterministic cause and effect. If you reject the concept of deterministic cause and effect, while regardless of whether or not it's true, it doesn't make any falsifiable predictions. Hypothesis of morphic resonance, necessarily, by the way, if something is more like habits, then you can say, oh, well, the habituality is just different. It's not as certain. It's just, they're not similar enough, right? There's so many terms here you have to define. And yeah, make clear make deterministic predictions from the concept of habits. The hypothesis, make a prediction whereupon you can determine a habit which would be then falsifiable. That could also be a method you could do. Like try and find out a habit which you can define in so clear terms that you can precise it. Right. So Rupert Sheldrake versus Sabine Hossenfelder, really? And so he gets to talk with some of the great minds with Zizek. Okay, I mean, yeah, it's obviously he's gaining more money from presenting this idea, this heresy, than he is gaining from what he used to do. Which is sort of an annoying thing when the article suggests that actually it's the scientists who have so much to lose from their rejecting their orthodoxy. The scientists have everything to gain from rejecting their orthodoxy. Their name becomes the name that everyone says in the future. The whole sort of heresy thing about how Galileo was right, wasn't he? That's Jesus Christ. I hate the fact that so many people are so gullible for pseudoscience. Hypothesis of morphic resonance also leads to a radically new interpretation of memory storage in the brain and of biological inheritance. Memory need not be stored in material traces inside brain, which are more like TV receivers than video recorders, turning into influences from the past. Biological inheritance need not all be coded in the genes or in epigenetic modification of the genes. Much of it depends on, which is fascinating that he rejects that, but much of it depends on morphic resonance from previous members of the species. Thus, each individual inherits a collective memory from past members of the species and also contributes to the collective memory of affecting other members of the species in the future. So, what? For previous members of the species. So, speciation is the point in which similarities end? Okay. Maybe that's testable? No? So everything in the same species should then inherit collective members from the past. But obviously it's kind of weird because we know evolution is gradual. It doesn't... My ancestor, going back all the way, was a fish or was an amoeba, right? So if we're... Why don't I get these memories? Thus each individual, yeah. This is definitely true for humans, but it's not clear that it's true for animals. The hypothesis was first put forward in a book, A New Science of Life, in 1981, discussed in greater detail in my main theoretical work, The Presence of the Past, published in 1988. See morphic fields for... Is this one? Is this the same one? Yeah, it is. A new, fully updated edition of A New Science of Life was published in the UK in 2009, and in the US under the title Morphic Resonance. In this edition, Appendix A describes the results of experimental tests. Oh, cool. Okay, and this is the David Bohm guy. Oh god, how long is it? Can I make this smaller? Yes, good. So that's discussion with David Bohm. Yeah, we can keep reading. Let's do a little bit of a... Yeah, let's do a water break at least. I think I want to do the fallacy video. Don't do have to pay as well. bit of tape on my glasses is, I think, making me exhausted. What? Did I not open my own? Oh, I did. Yeah. Let's take a moment to have a little bit more fun here. And just say 10 ways to spot pseudoscience.
Everyone. So I'm having this exchange right now with a guy who clearly doesn't seem to understand that, yes, I am in fact right when I am accusing him of promoting pseudoscience.
Huh.
You can check out my video to him there.
Hi everyone.
He did not take it well. What a shocker. Anyway, he clearly doesn't know what pseudoscience is. He wants me to prove him wrong, and since he's proposing things about science that aren't yet settled, clearly I can't prove him wrong, so apparently I can't prove that what he's doing is pseudoscience, or something like that. So I figured it's time to make a video talking about what pseudoscience is and how to recognize it. So what is pseudoscience? Well, in order to ask that, first we have to ask, what is science? Science is the systematic study of nature using methodological naturalism. It distinguishes itself from plain...
See? The idea is, and the reason this is an inherent property of scientific method is that it's the testable part, it's the practically useful part. It's not about being like, oh, only the nature has to exist. It's about only the nature is necessary or is only useful for us to predict things. If the more we can predict with this method, the better. Because it's a very useful, good method, or it's a very useful method. That's what good means in this context. Science doesn't really care about truth, it cares about useful truth. Whatever it might be absolutely true, whatever God might have written into the universe, isn't important for us until we get to that point. So science is this sort of gradualism, but yeah.
philosophy, in that it's not about making good arguments, it's about making claims that actually work. Whether they convince an audience or not, whether they seem intuitive or not, whether you can win debates with them or not. What matters is, do they work?
Yes.
What does the evidence say?
Does the model
If the
work?
evidence is with you, that is, the predictions you can make using your description.
And that's kind of the interesting thing here is usually it seems like we criticize things for being unworkable, like pseudoscience for being unworkable, but I think and so when sort of Sheldrake slams out these examples of things he could test, okay, that's why this part is this appendix A is probably the most interesting for me, because this what we need to do is what here I need to search for is what example would prove him wrong. That's the thing I've been looking for throughout all of this. What would prove me wrong? If maybe I should read the book and just leaf through it to see, like search if I buy the ebook and I just do a search through the whole thing, where am I wrong? What do I need to be proven wrong? Or false or falsifiability? Where is the adherence to falsifiability?
description are demonstrably accurate, then it's good. If not, it's bad. We talk about using the principle of falsification. If you make wrong predictions with a model, then it's obviously not an accurate description. It doesn't matter how good it sounds. Conversely, it doesn't matter how bad it sounds. If it gets things right, it clearly works, and you can use it for practical purposes. Pseudoscience is when you try to describe nature without adhering to scientific methodology. In other words, you don't care if it works or not.
No, it's not just that. You have to actually pretend it is science, right? You have to pretend that it is trying to do science. Trying to understand. Obviously, there's a part of the problem here is that we all know that science is the most effective way to understand things about reality. It's the only way that it constantly works. Or for thousands of years of philosophy, we really only got one thing. One thing for epistemology at least. We got some nice things for ethics and stuff, but epistemology we're left with only I think, therefore I am, and it took 2,000 years. So clearly, we're kind of not that interested in working. We're very, very interested in doing a lot of work, but not necessarily making a lot of progress. Whereas science is only interested in making progress. And so all of the things we see in our world are discovered through all of the tools, the computers, the phones, everything is discovered through the scientific method. So everyone who has a new theory, no matter how philosophical, no matter how unscientific, they will want to cloak themselves in the veneer of science so that they can rest on the sort of public perception of what is true, or how we should approach truth.
You are interested in something that people will buy, something that people will swallow, something that you can use to win debates, something that you can use to quell people's curiosity. But it doesn't matter if it works or not. Because once you care if it works, you're doing science. This is why you have to care about whether it works, and you have to do science if you want to be able to make good descriptions of nature, and not just ones that are meant to be sold as easy answers that will never be used for anything.
Yeah, because it's the difference between having sort of an artistic view of reality and a philosophical view of reality. These are cool things. It's enjoyable. I don't want people to stop doing these kinds of things. I just want them to stop saying it's science. It's not science. Metaphysics. That's what Rupert Sheldrake is doing. Metaphysics.
Except maybe scamming people. Pseudoscience is usually about scamming people, either for money or for admiration. You want to increase your social standing by being the wise man, the one who can answer questions, the one people come to for answers. But you never care about whether those answers are correct or not. You just want to make sure they come to you and not to anyone else, because then that person gets all the fame instead. That's what it's about. So the question now is, how can you recognize pseudoscience? Here are 10 telltale signs. 1. Appeals to intuition or logic. Those terms are treated as equivalent. Most people don't understand what logic is, so when you say just think logically about it, that tends to mean to most people,
Like,
what does your gut tell you?
yeah, exactly.
In other words,
Intuition.
logic means intuition. In the context of, actual logic, logic means something else. It's an analysis of internal consistency. But most people don't know what that means. So again, treat logic and intuition as synonymous terms for this purpose. Pseudoscience is
We should
an
mention
intuition.
logic actually tells you nothing about how the nature works. That's exactly true. It can only tell you whether a description of it is internally consistent. Logic, you can make an infinite number, presumably, of logically consistent models of reality. Hence string theory. Like, all of these are logically consistent. They're just not necessarily consistent with nature. So, when I say string theory, there are so many different explanations or many different versions of string theory, and if you need to explain something else, you can change the parameters a little bit, change what the fundamental constants are. So you essentially have a set of an infinite number of string theory explanations that are possible for explaining a system. So, and all of these can be internally consistent, even though they can't all be true at the same time. Even if one of them is true, none of them might be true, or one of them might be true, but they can't all be true. And so, but they're even though they're all logically consistent. So logic tells you nothing about nature; it tells you about the internal consistency of a thing.
As synonymous terms for this purpose. Pseudoscience is meant to be easy to understand. Science is not. Science is meant to work. It doesn't matter if it's easy to understand or not. If it works, it works.
Tragic
if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. How easy it is to understand or how hard it is to understand doesn't enter into it. But since...
Which I think is sort of the tragic... I mean, I hate doing this, now is the worst time ever, but there's a tragic problem with science becoming better and better, is that it becomes more and more complex and more difficult to understand, because otherwise we would have already thought of these ideas. So you need sort of... So the more this happens, the more arcane and incomprehensible this seems, the easier it will become for pseudoscientists to appeal to, or for laymen really to appeal to people's intuition and say, well, science can't be wrong because you can't understand it, right? How could this be? If we go back to the Eric Holloway article I was watching or was reading earlier, it's like, I don't have it up still, but it's the appeals to logical or to intuition, to sort of just think logically or to common sense, will naturally become more and more powerful as science becomes more and more complex, and science does become more and more complex because it's trying to explain more and more phenomena.
Pseudoscience isn't meant to work.
And also, more specifically, it's if it's not just science isn't just trying to explain more and more phenomena. Science is if the models of science were the simplest ones, the most intuitive ones, then the Greeks already wrote them down. They already debated them. We already dealt with them in the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. All of these ideas have already been dealt with to various extents. And certainly, that's why when I was reading about morphic resonance in the beginning or watching the videos, it's like, this very much sounds like all of the New Age hippie nonsense. We've heard these ideas before. These ideas have been prevalent for thousands of years, and they are currently looked down upon and have been looked down upon for hundreds of years. So this is a problem of science. These simpler theories are more appealing, but they're also less likely to be right because they have already been thought of and already been tested. But of course, to understand that, you need to go through all of the hundreds of years of science to get it. It's like if I'm trying to explain if I'm talking to a flat earther, I don't go and jump straight into general relativity. I start with Newtonian mechanics, because Newtonian mechanics is at least intuitive. General relativity, the idea not only that space but time is bent by the presence of matter, is horrendously unintuitive, unless you're really, really good at maths and you are like really good at abstract geometry.
Its sole appeal is that it has to be easy to understand. It's much easier to learn pseudoscience than science. It doesn't even require you to take any courses. You can learn all there is about a pseudoscience by watching a YouTube video. So very often pseudoscience proponents will explicitly appeal to intuition or logic and say, just think about this. Really, does what they say actually make sense? Do you come from a monkey? Look out at the horizon. Look how flat it looks. Does it really make sense that the Earth is round? Questions like that. They appeal to intuition. They want you to ignore the evidence and listen to your gut. Science never does that. 2. Uses fallacious reasoning, especially appeals to emotion. Once again, this has to do with making pseudoscience seem believable. You want to believe in it because it sounds good. You are special. You can have superpowers. You can cure a disease without having to take a shot that hurts or without taking medications that might have side effects. It's just appealing. You want it to be true. You want to be able to think yourself happy or think yourself healthy. You want to be able to drink this snake oil that has no side effects whatsoever, because it has no effects at all, and get better. The appeal to emotion is always there. You want this to be true. But other fallacies happen as well. Circular reasoning is very common, as are statistical fallacies, where you are supposed to draw a bad conclusion from bad data. 3. Relies on anecdotal evidence and confirmation bias. Yeah, the statistical fallacies. Since there is no good evidence.
I think sort of the better point here, or it sort of just stems from what he said earlier, which is that the lack of falsificationism. The sort of confirmation bias thing is, yeah, like what I've been noticing here the whole time. I keep insisting on, when I keep insisting on testable proposals, he keeps flinging out things that that are phrased in such a way that it doesn't sound like he cares if they're disproven, or it doesn't seem like he's giving me a method to disprove it. If you are not giving me a method to disprove, that's what science is all about. That's what all scientists are doing all of the time. When you make a new theory, a new hypothesis, you present to the rest of the world, this is my hypothesis and here's how you prove it wrong, go. And then they try their best to prove it wrong. They use every trick in the book. They even twist and change your test. Say, okay, well, obviously you're going to have already tested it in this way, but we can twist and change it. So you gotta give me the disprovable. Otherwise, you're just doing confirmation bias.
Evidence supporting anything pseudoscientific, then it would not be
And anything is true.
pseudoscience. Bad evidence is all you're ever going to get. And by bad evidence, I mean evidence that's so bad it can definitely be used to prove something that isn't true. Confirmation bias means that you remember the hits and ignore all the misses. So something that accidentally gets it right 1% of the time, well, you don't mention the 99%, and all of a sudden you have a very good case, right? This is very common in pseudoscience, and when this is pointed out, how do they always respond? Stop being so skeptical. Open your mind.
Yeah.
You will never hear that in science.
Closed mind.
In
Yeah.
science, skepticism is
It's like me as like my brain only way my brain can understand things is by going, well, what if that's wrong? Well, what if that's wrong? Well, what would the world look like if that's what you're saying is false? And so, and the thing is, whenever I do this to science, I end up being embarrassed because they show me, and that's a good thing. But every time I do it with pseudoscience, I end up saying, well, why are you so closed-minded? So I'm disappointed in pseudoscience. Yeah, this is the problem also with watching these kinds of videos. They're supposed to sort of make me more light-hearted about it and make me understand that there are other people here who see the same thing as me, but it just makes me more and more frustrated at the whole of it. He's very much relying on... Okay, let's read. Over morphic fields in biology. I don't even want to read that intro. It's bad. Over the course of 15 years of research on plant development, I came to the conclusion that for understanding the development of plants, their morphogenesis, genes and gene products are not enough. Morphogenesis also depends on organizing fields. Same arguments apply to the development of animals. Since the 1920s, many developmental biologists have proposed that biological organization depends on fields, variously called biological fields or developmental fields. or positional fields, or morphogenetic fields. All cells come from other cells, and all cells inherit fields of organization. Genes are part of this organization. They play an essential role, but they do not explain the organization itself. Why not? Yeah, why not? Thanks to molecular biology, we know what genes do. They enable organisms to make particular proteins. Other genes are involved in the control of protein synthesis. Identifiable genes are switched on, and particular proteins are made at the beginning of new developmental processes. Some of these developmental switch genes, like the Hox genes in fruit flies, worms, fish, mammals, are very similar. In evolutionary terms, they are highly conserved. By switching on genes such as these cannot in itself determine form, otherwise fruit flies would not look different. What? That is a massive leap. First of all, they're very similar, not identical, so then they would look different from us. So, what different here? Like, we're saying the comparisons of the genes, like we say a banana shares like half of its genetic information with us. Well, compared to a rock, or like the pile of carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen, and oxygen that all living things are made of, maybe we are much more similar to a banana than we are to those gases. Like, all you got is a bunch of coal, some hydrogen gas, some oxygen gas, and some nitrogen gas, all ready to react at any moment. And all of these things are... Yeah, so the idea they would not look different. Well, it depends on, like, they're very similar, both in, like, maybe they are as similar in information, in genetics, as they are in looks. It's just that the form, like the form of a living being is more similar than the form of another living being than a cloud of gas. By a very, like, maybe the halfway point between a human and a pile of gas is a banana. That's not actually that incredulous. And it's the same sense here. The fact that we're very similar, sure, we can see lots of big differences between us and fruit flies, but maybe the size of these differences, like, it's in the eye of the beholder. It's from our perspective. It looks really, like, imagine you see two objects very far away. These two objects might be, they would look perhaps similar in distance away from you, but maybe one of them is twice as far away from you. But the problem is from your perspective. Like, if you have a hill and a mountain in the distance, it might seem like the hill is as big as the mountain, but they're not. It's the trick of the perspective. In the same way, our perspective as humans might trick us into thinking that these differences are more significant than they are. So, by switching on genes such as these cannot in itself determine form. Why? No. Fruit flies would look different from us even if that determines form. If we're saying that protein creation causes the cascading effects and how they are created and what extent they're created and how often and when they turn off this, like, it's not just... He's literally going into the very specific. Other genes are controlled. Identifiable genes are switched on in particular are made. Some of these are very similar, and so some of our genes are not identical. Some of our genes are very similar. Therefore, there should be no differences. Is it really just? How can a person read that sentence and not go, oh, he's delusional. He's clearly out of his fucking mind. No, we need to take a break. We need to take a break and sort of just cope with the fact that there are so many retards in the world. What's fun? Let's watch something fun. fun. Honestly, this might be today's video. I was feeling extra lazy today. I feel like it might be today's video. Yeah, I mean, we're not dealing with can consciousness be materialistic anymore either. So yeah, this feels like a good point to end. What was it there? I am I'll subscribe to him just to get maybe I'll watch this just for the lulz. But not now and not for the stream. I will. Yeah, it's still 3 hours until I have to go to get my glasses, but I will go do something else and chill. I think I will do more reading though, but I might not do that much more reading of. But I need to find a way to do it. Well, actually, it was more fun to read than it was to add the sort of videos. Yeah. Actually, let's just calm my mind down. Let's see if we can get back to reading. Maybe I'm just unreasonably upset. Maybe we need to listen to some music. I don't know. That probably gets me demonetized on YouTube or something. I don't know. Get me a copyright strike and then my YouTube. Yeah, maybe that's why people do things on Twitch. Ow. So maybe there is something to do. Just reading. Yeah, we could do just reading. Only books. There we go. I was thinking of an OnlyFans, but only books. There you go. Yeah, I'm done. My energy is too low. I'm annoyed at my glasses. I want to take them off. I want to take off my headset. I want to not read anymore. I want to take a break. And thank you all